because this is a joint problem, and it requires joint effort.
This is let's go now to, we're going to live pictures coming, I understand, I think they're in Strasbourg. Apologies, that seems to be pictures of Gordon Brown arriving in Baden-Baden. This NATO summit is being jointly hosted by France and Germany. We've already seen the French president welcoming the U.S. President Barack Obama in Strasbourg. Now Gordon Brown arriving on that plane now. He's arriving in Baden-Baden. And we're getting news from our correspondent traveling with the Prime Minister that Britain is prepared to consider a temporary increase in troop numbers for Afghanistan to cover the election period in August. Britain is the second largest troop contributor with some 8,000 troops. And as we've been reporting, Barack Obama is not going to publicly ask for more troops, but it looks like Britain is willing to help on a temporary basis. The NATO summit's deliberations on Afghanistan will be watched closely in the country itself. Violence is on the rise and Taliban militants have been gaining ground. The U.S. says the deployment of additional troops will help, but a report released today by 11 aid agencies has warned of an increase in civilian casualties. Ian Pannell reports in the Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan.
How to bring peace and stability to Afghanistan. These forces have been fighting and dying here for more than 7 years now. And yet the question still stands: how to defeat an insurgency that continues to grow. America is sending more troops, and there are questions whether other NATO countries should now do the same. The problems here are enormous. Poverty is widespread, and trust in the government is low. Corruption is rampant. And now there is a new law setting women's rights back significantly. But above all, it's security that matters. And every year that NATO has been here, conditions have got worse. More than 2,000 people died last year in a conflict many are warning will get worse this summer.
The old Soviet tanks rusting away here in the Panjshir Valley are a stark reminder of the dangers that lie in store for any foreign government thinking of military action here in Afghanistan. For many people, the question now is not really how many forces come to the country, but what their role should be. Ian Pannell, BBC News, in the Panjshir Valley.
Pictures, Angela Merkel in pink, about to meet, there she is giving a kiss to Barack Obama, who's now arrived in Baden-Baden, jointly hosting this NATO summit with the French city of Strasbourg. His wife, Michelle, now taking off that coat that we saw earlier when she arrived in Strasbourg, also greeting Angela Merkel. And of course, these leaders had also been in touch here in London, where there was the G20 summit. Everywhere he goes, Barack Obama is getting cheering from the crowds. We saw the same in Strasbourg. And now Angela Merkel taking him inside. Well, no, they're going to stop there for some pictures. All of this for the 60th anniversary of the Transatlantic Alliance, NATO. Afghanistan is certainly going to be at the top of the agenda, but great efforts have been underway to try to ensure that the summit passes off smoothly without any of the acrimony and rancor that has characterized some of the meetings in recent months. For more than a year now, as European allies haven't come up with the troops. Well, our correspondent Paul Adams is covering this summit. Paul, even though, of course, Barack Obama would love European leaders, including Angela Merkel, to say, I'm going to send more troops, it sounds like he won't embarrass the allies by asking for that up front.
He's being quite careful how he couches this, Lise. He has made it plain in the last week or so that he and the United States are prepared to send a lot more troops, 21,000 more troops to Afghanistan, 4,000 of those to be involved in training of the Afghan security forces. But he doesn't want to let the Europeans off the hook. And when he talked a short time ago to a very enthusiastic audience of young French and Germans, he did say Europe should not simply expect the US to shoulder the burden alone. So he's clearly looking to the Europeans for some sign that they are willing to match, if not troop numbers, at least the statement of intent that he feels he has made on behalf of the United States. So he's looking for money to fund the operation in Afghanistan. He's looking for assistance with the whole training effort, and also a great emphasis on the civilian side of NATO's operations in Afghanistan. He thinks that if the Europeans are prepared to stump up on that front, then the bargain will not be a bad one. We are hearing some reports, and they're unconfirmed at the moment, from reporters travelling with the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who's just arrived here in Strasbourg, that Britain may be talking in terms of stumping up some extra troops to cover the period during the Afghan elections in the summer. But we'll need to find out a little bit more about those proposals.
Yes, indeed, those reports are coming in, Paul, and the offer of additional troops for the Afghan elections in August seems to be accompanied by a sense that there has to be burden sharing. As you well know, this idea that there's going to be a two-tier alliance with some countries, Britain, Canada, the United States, fighting, and other countries like Germany posting troops to areas while they're playing a good role, they're not involved in the worst of the combat.
No, that's right. I was talking a short time ago to the chairman of NATO's military council, and who was saying that he feels that this request from the Americans for additional troops around the period of the elections would be somewhat honoured, or at least honoured to a certain degree, perhaps not entirely. There are signs that some countries will be prepared to make this temporary deployment to cover the period over the elections. We don't exactly know what the composition will be, but NATO officials do seem quietly confident that they may get what they need on that score.
Many issues, of course, Paul, will be on the NATO summit. One of them, of course, is relations with Russia, which have been frosty, to put it mildly, but there must be some relief that Barack Obama and Medvedev got off to a good start in London.
That's right. I mean, this whole week it isn't just about the G20, it's not just about NATO, it's also about the Obama roadshow, the Obama Getting to Know You roadshow. He's already had key bilateral meetings with the Russian and Chinese leaders. This morning he had talks with President Sarkozy, and here he is in Baden-Baden about to hold talks with Angela Merkel too. So it's very, very much about him showing his face in Europe, getting to know the European leaders, reassuring them that the bad old days of where the United States spoke dismissively of Europe and some Europeans spoke with undisguised hostility about the United States, that those days are now well and truly behind us. And he spoke very eloquently about that when he addressed the town meeting here in Strasbourg just an hour or two ago.
But there's no denying that despite all the new atmospherics, there's real concerns in NATO about their major tests, and most of all, of course, Afghanistan.
Yes, I think there is grave concern. I mean, I think that, broadly speaking, NATO members agree with the American conclusion at the end of that strategic review of the operation in Afghanistan conducted by the Americans in recent months, that essentially the operation is not going well and it needs to be retooled and refocused. There is general consensus that, yes, it needs to take into account the regional dimension, both Pakistan and India, although, as officials will tell you, we don't really have any levers that we can pull when it comes to Pakistan. We can certainly pull levers in Afghanistan, but not in Pakistan. But there is a recognition that this is a wider regional issue, and some fresh thinking is required. And I think, generally speaking, there's a sense of gratitude that the Americans have taken a long, hard look at the operation in Afghanistan and reached some practical conclusions.
Well, Paul, as we speak, we're watching Barack Obama and Angela Merkel inspecting the troops, and Angela Merkel having to nudge him along at certain points, showing him how where to move on the carpet, when to stop and when to go. But all of these meetings between the leaders, as you say, in London and here, must be good for cementing these critical relationships.
Yes, I mean, there is an enormous sense of possibility generated by President Obama's arrival on the world stage, the possibility that enmities that we take for granted might actually, in some small and perhaps unexpected way, begin to fade away. No one should have any illusions that suddenly there's going to be a rapid breakthrough when it comes to relations with Iran, with Moscow, with Cuba, some of the other traditional enemies, if you like. but there is a sense that President Obama is genuinely interested in dialogue. He keeps saying he's come here to listen and to learn and not just to lecture people about what people should do. But it's an interesting double-edged thing, because on the one hand he's saying I want to listen, on the other hand he's saying we, the United States, are taking this Afghan NATO mission by the scruff of the neck, we're giving it a good shake, we're deciding what we think needs to be done about it, and it is up to you, Europeans. If you're not willing to stump up the extra troops, so be it. Find other ways to make yourselves useful, because this isn't working and we need to turn it around.
And how important to this sense of commitment is the return of France to the NATO Military Committee, now a full member of the NATO alliance?